You are listening to KSG podcast. This is a short, crisp, concise, exam-oriented, edited editorial for civil services aspirants. In this podcast, we are going to talk about the latest IPCC report. Source for the content is Amitabh Sinha's article for the Indian Express. A common theme of all the reports of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, that is IPCC, in recent years has been the emphasis on early action. A substantial part of the journey to a carbon neutral world has to be made in the near term, in the next 5 or 10 years. If that does not happen, there is little hope for restricting the global rise in temperatures to within 1.5 or 2 degrees Celsius from pre-industrial times. The latest IPCC report, which is the third and final part of its sixth assessment report, has added further urgency to this warning. The near term is not 5 or 10 years from now, it is now. Unless the global greenhouse gas emissions peaks by 2025, just 3 years from now, and is cut by at least 43% from current levels by 2030, the 1.5 degree target cannot be achieved, it says. That is a tough ask, considering that global emissions are still showing an increasing trend. Greenhouse gas emissions in 2019 are about 12% higher than in 2010, but the important thing is that it is not an impossible task, far from it, in fact. The latest IPCC report emphasizes that strengthening of climate action to keep alive the 1.5 degree target was not just possible, but to a large extent also feasible and affordable. Now, the 1.5 degree target is likely to be breached. Global average temperatures have already risen about 1.1 degrees Celsius from pre-industrial times. The 1.5 degrees Celsius threshold would most likely be breached even in the best case scenario. In fact, the likelihood of achieving the 1.5 degree target is now even lower than in 2018 when the IPCC had come out with a special report on the feasibility of keeping global rise in temperatures to within 1.5 degrees Celsius. If everything is done right, then it would be possible to bring the temperatures down a little at a later stage, possibly within 1.5 degree limit by the end of this century. But a temporary overshoot of this limit seems unavoidable now. But as climate change experts point out, the 1.5 degree or 2 degrees Celsius thresholds are arbitrary targets. It's not as if 1.5 degrees Celsius temperature rise is safe, but 1.6 degree is not. Navroz Dubash, a professor at Delhi-based Center for Policy Research and one of the lead authors of the latest IPCC report, says that the impacts of rising temperatures are cascading in nature. So higher the temperatures rise, the worse the impacts are. That means a 1.5 degree target is better than 1.6 degree, and that is better than 1.7 degree, and so on. The lower we are able to restrict the temperature rise to, the better it is for the world. So the idea is to make every effort to keep it as low as we possibly can. The climate actions that are currently promised would result in a world that would be about 3.2 degrees Celsius warmer than pre-industrial times, and that is not a comfortable scenario at all. The situation already is so grim that even after substantial reductions in emissions, human beings would have to rely on futuristic carbon dioxide removal, that is CDR technologies, to bring down the temperatures. CDR technologies, most of which are undeveloped and untested, refer to the physical removal of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere to reduce the greenhouse gas effect, which leads to warming of the planet. But we still have some feasible options available. A lot of reductions in the current level of emissions can be achieved through existing technologies that are not just feasible but are also affordable, though both the feasibility as well as affordability vary across regions and sectors. Importantly, the new IPCC report points out that nearly half the world's current emissions can be cut by 2030 using only technologies that cost less than $100 to reduce 1 ton of carbon dioxide equivalent. Examples of such technologies include large-scale deployment of renewables like solar or wind energy, carbon sequestration in soil, reduction in deforestation, and improvement of energy efficiency. And 25% of the current emissions can be reduced using technologies that cost less than $20 per ton of CO2. Such technologies include the shift to electric vehicles, lifestyle changes like adoption of cycles instead of motorized vehicles, and large-scale use of public transport. The IPCC also notes the dramatic reduction in costs of some of these technologies in the last few years. The cost of solar energy or lithium ion batteries, for example, has come down by nearly 85%, while the cost of wind power has reduced by 55% since 2010. Large scale adoption of these options can result in a significant reduction in current emissions. It says that there are mitigation options which are feasible to deploy at scale in the near term. Barriers to feasibility would need to be reduced or removed, and enabling conditions strengthened to deploy mitigation options at scale. That's it for this podcast. Thank you so much for listening. To join KSG in the courses and to crack the ICE exam, visit ksgna.com. You can also get a PDF of this podcast on ksgna.com.